This episode of New Politics was released on the 8th of November, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
The Arms Expo in Sydney, funded by the New South Wales Government, where protesters get beaten up by the police. Robodebt 2.0 is the federal government bringing back the same system of cruelty it once condemned. Australia's first treaty in Victoria, can it survive the politics of fear? And we have a socialist in the system. We'll look at Zohran Mamdani's election win in New York and find out what it means for Australia. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this and much more coming up in this important episode of New Politics.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
On the march in Darling Harbour, hundreds of protesters converged at a major defence conference. They were met by the riot squad and mounted police unit attempting to keep demonstrators back. Officers used pepper spray as some tried to break through metal barricades. Dozens were left injured.
The Indo-Pacific International Maritime Expo was held at Darling Harbour during the week, and it was a glossy parade of all the killing machines used in war. And the Defence Minister Richard Marles went so far to call all of this beautiful, menacing and extremely cool. But behind all of the glossiness of this trade show and all the PR is something that is a lot more sinister, and that's Australia's growing addiction to military hardware and profiting from war. This expo was sponsored by the New South Wales Labor government, and it was put on for weapons manufacturers, including Israeli companies that have been accused of aiding the genocide and the destruction of Gaza. So this is an event sponsored by the New South Wales government, paid for by taxpayers. And if that's going to be the case, David, well, people do have the right to protest about how this money is going to be used. And that's exactly what ended up happening. Hundreds of protesters gathered peacefully to call out Australia's complicity in genocide through this expo. But as soon as the speeches were over, police moved in with their riot squads, police horses and the pepper spray. And there were ultimately 13 arrests out of all of this. And I think it's just another reminder of how dissent is now seen as a dangerous activity in Australia. We saw that in Melbourne with all of those military expos last year, and we're seeing it again in Sydney. And we're seeing this situation when the state decides that something is acting against their interests and they'll act quite brutally to shut it down. And David, this isn't about law enforcement. This is more about state repression and suppression. And we're getting to see more and more of this in New South Wales. And it wasn't so long ago that the Labor Party once took a very strong stand against war conscription and war profiteering, and today we see it sponsoring a weapons expo using taxpayers' money. And this is all happening while the people in Gaza are trying to remove rubble and search for the people who have been killed by these weapons as well. This seems to be the new face of Australian power, and to paraphrase the words of Richard Marles, it's not the beautiful, but it is the menacing, and it's totally obscene.
One wonders what type of adult calls weapons designed to kill cool. It's high school toxic masculinity stuff, let alone a representative of a country. Labor's embrace of this is disturbing. And of course, Labor and militarism has had a very uneasy relationship. It's Kim Beazley who changes it when he becomes Defence Minister and starts loving riding around in tanks and putting bazookas on his shoulders and wearing the helmets. Before then, of course, John Curtin had been a pacifist thrown into a wartime prime ministerial role. And Labor had allowed conscription for local. So it's now the Army Reserve, basically looked after Australia's local defence issues, prisoner of war camps, barracks, etc., etc. Curtin was able to convince Caucus that New Guinea was a part of this, and the CMF was the organisation known by the regular army as the Chocos, were the first force to defeat the Japanese army. But it was a decision that was not taken lightly. Conscription had split the Labor Party in 1916, where half the Labor Party left and formed the Nationalist Party. One of the
it also went to a referendum as well, which
went to
defeated.
a referendum, which it lost fairly. Yeah, they took it to referendum. Hughes took a group of Labor dissenters. And of course, when Vietnam happened, the Liberal Party reintroduces conscription. But once Gough Whitlam gets in, he brings the troops straight home and ends conscription in 1972 with one piece of legislation. It then becomes Labor commits troops to the first Gulf War, for example, although it was only a couple of ships in the end. And when I say only, it's still a couple of hundred people who were put under extreme risk. But Labor should be the party of peace because it is the working class. It is the people of Labor who are the ones who are thrown into the front line. Now, I know that when we look at the statistics, more officers were killed in the First World War than on a per capita basis, etc., etc. But it was still the vast majority of troops in First World War and the Second World War in Vietnam were from the working class. So you'd think that Labor would be far less willing to support an arms fest in Sydney. And we can say the same about the Victorian government last year. The arguments about the jobs are specious at best. I don't know that buying weapons creates more jobs, except maybe in the military. And the military is, for a whole range of reasons, going through a recruitment crisis at the moment, which you'd think would say something to the federal government.
But for me, a lot of this feels it's a combination of the politics of convenience and also the politics of betrayal. It's got this weird combination going on within the Labor Party. And I realise that politics is always going to be a combination of double standards and a whole lot of other things that are going on. And once you become the leader of the government of the day, whether that's the federal government or the New South Wales government, there has to be a level of pragmatism. But for the Labor Party and through the union movement, well, it was the party of anti-war sentiment and working class solidarity and of international justice. And that's certainly in the platform of the Labor Party, and now it just seems to be more like a marketing arm of the global arms trade. And I'm probably simplifying it a little bit too much, but Chris Minns, like the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns, he's like one of those spruikers up at the cross, the way that he was talking up this event, saying that the defence export industry contributes $3.4 billion to the New South Wales economy, but he went all quiet when he was asked about the Israeli weapons manufacturers, Albert and Raphael, just saying that, hang on, I'm not responsible for the invitation list. And he was actually even more quiet and quickly changed the subject when he was asked about all of these industries aiding war crimes and genocide in places like Gaza and in Sudan as well. And it's not just we've been talking about the Labor Party here, but it's not just the Labor Party that's getting off on all of this. In 2017, the Defence Minister Christopher Pyne said that he wanted Australia to become one of the world's top 10 defence exporters within the next decade. And it looks like we're on track to actually achieve that. So it was Christopher Pyne who did the groundwork for all of this, and Richard Marles and Chris Minns, well, they're just reaping the rewards for this, if you can call it that. So it's just this cycle of politicians, reps from the defence industry, corporations, and we can also see that every conflict around the world links back to this Western military industrial system, and now Australia is trying to profit from the killing fields all around Africa, Middle East, Western Asia, and getting the taxpayers to foot the bill for all of this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Eddie. It's built upside down, and a Labor government supporting this should be widely condemned. It's not really a Labor government. It's Liberal light dressed up as Labor. I suppose I should be careful in saying this, but I wonder when the last time Richard Marles was in the western suburbs of Melbourne or Sydney or Perth or the eastern suburbs of Perth or the poorer areas of Adelaide. I suspect it's been a long time since they've walked into, I don't know, the Rudy Hill RSL without it having to be some kind of managed event.
Well, I'd also be worried about when was the last time he actually went onto a battlefield, because that's the issue here. Like, all of these people have got no recollection. Like, well, obviously someone like Richard Marles hasn't been to a war field, nor has Chris Minns, but if those people actually went out to see what it was actually like, they'd probably change their tune about all of this.
You'd certainly hope so. I'm being careful here because I don't want to judge a person's choice. But someone like Andrew Hastie, who has been in the front line and has shaped his opinions around that, at least, as much as I disagree with him and think that he's not terribly good and all of that, at least when he talks about defence stuff, he has stared down the barrel of angry fire. Tony Abbott's posturing, I imagine that if he was actually put into the middle of a firefight, he wouldn't cope as well as he tells us he would. And David Niven, the actor who served with distinction in World War II, said those that go should never point the finger at those that don't, and vice versa. And because it becomes a choice of the individual. But those that haven't been shouldn't assume the experience can be described, and shouldn't assume how they would react in the circumstance, because it's just not.
Yeah, but I think that what we're seeing right now isn't so much about political weakness or cowardice or anything like that. I think it's just a deeper moral decay within Australian democracy. And I'm not trying to be all moralistic about this or think that politics has to be absolutely pure to be effective, but you've got to have some values, otherwise what's the point? But I think that through this action of being so pro-war and beating up protesters, which we saw during the week in Darling Harbour, I think the Labor Party is alienating its own base. And that's the workers, the students, the activists, and all of those people who still believe in peace and accountability. And this is the same party that once stood with all of those dock workers boycotting South Africa over apartheid in the 1970s and the 1980s. And now they're proudly exporting military parts to Israel and supporting a genocide in Gaza through that. And so I think that's what one of the issues is.
One wonders, where is the union movement?
Well, they've been very quiet, haven't they?
Which is unusual for a movement that has been very loud over the last few years on certain issues. They've been very quiet on the genocide. Other countries, the unions have refused to pack the ships for Israel, particularly those carrying weapons and weapons parts. Even in Australia, 1938, Bob Menzies was jeered when he visited the ports, which were loading the iron for Japan. The argument being that there was a war coming with Japan and all this stuff would be sent back to Australia through cannons and ammunition to be aimed at the people currently packing it or refusing to pack it. And he gets the nickname Pig Iron Bob, which sticks with him. Should we call it Spare Parts Miles? Because he was also the one who argued in the last protest that, no, it's not one of the deadly parts of the plane, it's one of the non-lethal parts of the plane. Oh, that's all right then. The wings don't do anything. But
I think also through this process and these sort of expo events, we can see that Australia's become this obedient lapdog of the Western military order that's being defined by AUKUS, the arms exporting industry, in this process of trying to normalise military conflict. Now, I've always believed that conflict is a part of the human condition, or international conflict, and we'll never get rid of it completely. But the task of political leaders has to be to try and reduce conflicts and wars and not add to it, or saying those things such as, if we don't supply all of these parts and weapons, someone else will. Well, that's not leadership. That's political weakness and the cowardice that I talked about before. And pretty soon, this new economy of war and military parts, the F-35 pieces and all that sort of stuff, that's going to become like an addiction for governments in Australia. And we've seen that with gambling revenues. Once governments get used to these sorts of revenues, it's just really hard for them to give up, irrespective of how damaging that is. And that's why I think every small act of resistance has to be promoted and pushed at every opportunity and not shut down by the bloody police.
It is the police's role to keep public order. Okay. And occasionally demonstrations get out of hand. Now, we can argue as to why. Some eyewitness will say it was an overzealous police officer who forced a protester to act in some kind of self-defense. Sometimes, of course, it is agitating protesters who the emotions get out of control and they react in a way that is not ideal. I'll put it that way. And unless you're there, you don't know what the truth is. And even if you are there, it can be hard to determine what the truth is. So the police turning up to demonstrations is probably not as unreasonable as it might seem. But when they turn up ready for a riot, I suspect there's a psychological or an unconscious urge that we've brought in the tactical response group. We better use them.
Well, it's a little bit like a footballer turning up to a game and expecting to play the game.
Yeah, and then, that's exactly it. And If it was just uniformed police who were there to ensure public safety, to put a lid on any ratbags who may have turned up, and there's not a lot of ratbags, by the way. We shouldn't forget that the march over the bridge with 300,000 people, there were no arrests. And in fact, the police were taken aback by the fact that they'd lost the court case and had to deal with this. Made some errors, particularly in directing the crowd, but behaved pretty well. And the errors they made, I think, could be explained away by just the lack of expectation of the numbers. And when I say explained away, hopefully they learned from it. So when it happens again, and it will, things will run a lot smoother. But no one really came away from that protest saying, the police were uniformly terrible the whole day and provoked us into being arrested. Whereas this one, interestingly enough, it was obviously a way to try and suppress and oppress protest. The riot squad turn up, and as you said, as soon as the speeches end, they start wailing into people. And that's not good. That's not good at all. And presumably under the direction of a Labor government makes it worse. Why the Labor government didn't say, wind back, suddenly arrest those who are damaging property or disturbing the public peace in a violent way. Okay, that may be a problem. But keep it quiet, keep it safe, and let them have their say. That's what the Labor government should have said. But of course, they don't want to lose these contracts. And of course, the point at which Australia joins the manufacturing process isn't the highly profitable part, which is, of course, in the sales. The manufacturing part. We're not manufacturing the whole weapon, we're just manufacturing bits of it. So a few people do well, and that's the Australian model. A couple people do well, and there'll be no jobs in it, because they're already existing factories. It's unlikely that demand for the parts will grow any more than it is, where the world is actually getting more peaceful. There are less wars going on now in the world than ever before.
And that's not good for business.
That's not good for business. The Megadeth album, Peace Sells, But Who's Buying? And instead of looking at, when they do look at things like health, they try and profit from it so much it becomes unaffordable for all but the very wealthy. And this is what a Labor government, whether it's state or federal, should be arguing for. Cheaper, better, more efficient, more beneficial to a greater part of the public than a lesser part. Arms manufacturers and genocide supporters, gambling and the elite of the mining industry, etc., etc. Labor should be helping as many people as it can, not as many rich people as it can.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
Robodebt was the scandalous government program that was created by the Morrison government, and that mainly harassed welfare recipients and sent out automatic debt notices even when the debts had not been incurred. But it seems like all the lessons that should have been learnt from all of those mistakes still haven't been picked up by the Albanese government. In 2024, the Australian Taxation Office quietly expanded its partnership with Recoveries Corp. And that's a private debt collection firm owned by the Allegro Private Equity Group. And it's been handed more than $42 million in contracts to chase down unpaid tax, and not just from the big corporations, but from ordinary Australians, including welfare recipients and people already on negotiated and agreed to payment plans. Over 350,000 people have now been referred to Recoveries Corp, and many of these people have reported getting final notice letters out of the blue demanding payment within 7 days and sometimes within just 3 days, and also with threats of legal action or garnished wages. And for sure, David, this isn't exactly like Robodebt, but it's got a lot of the same features. It harasses people, it doesn't have a human face, it's hard to make contact with these people to find out what's going on. And the independent MPs, Zali Steggall and Andrew Wilkie, have called this system heavy-handed and deeply unethical, and have suggested that a lot of this is very similar to the coercive culture of Robodebt. And David, we were told last year or the year before that this type of thing would never, ever happen again. But it's not exactly the same as Robodebt, as I keep explaining, but it's starting to look very, very similar.
It seems they may have got rid of some of the architecture of Robodebt, but kept in the foundations of how they were doing it. It looks like that there's a bit of AI manipulation going on. I was reading the Mandarin this morning, an excellent journal on the public service, and they did their Frank and Fearless poll, as they do every year. And one of the things is that public servants are using AI to help them in there. So I wonder if the people in charge of the departmental issues of putting in a whole lot of people into AI, and I was saying, yep, send this to recoveries debt. Now, of course, this shouldn't be privatised. This is just absolute nonsense that the government would send out their debt collection to a private firm. Every circumstance is different. I'm sure there are people who can afford it who don't pay, but I'm also sure that's a minority. I'm guessing that most of the people who don't pay are actually people who can't pay for whatever reason. And those reasons can be from anything from absent-mindedness. I thought the debt was due on the 11th of December, but it was the 12th of November, that type of thing, through to they've had all kinds of financial issues and they just don't have the cash. I know it's a lot of people. And of course, you whittle it down by, you send out the letters, oh, look, you haven't paid, or email, you haven't paid. Most people will respond, oh, yeah, I haven't either. Oh, gosh, this is why. Either here's the money or can we come up with a plan? Some won't respond. And again, for all kinds of reasons. So you send out another letter. Yep. And then, oh, yeah, I did get the first one, but I forgot to, or what have you. Sending it through to recoveries debt, who aren't interested in subtlety and nuance, or it seems legality, recoveries core. Seems to me an abrogation of duty, which is what, of course, neoconservative governments love. They don't want duty. They just want to get the money and then shovel it off to their mates. So if Labor was serious, they would end the contract with recoveries, bring it back in-house and bring in a more, as the Royal Commission suggested, a more compassionate, fairer, transparent system that is consistent in its inconsistencies. Case A, yep, they've got the cash. They just haven't done it for whatever reason. We'll get the cash. Case B, don't have the cash, aren't willing to pay. We'll look at why they're not willing to pay. Case C doesn't have the cash, is willing to pay. We can come up with a deal. Now, all of those, there's a million subtleties in all of that too. But it shouldn't be left to a private firm who only makes money if they're collecting money. And that's the trouble. Government shouldn't be a money-making operation. If it makes money, great, don't get me wrong, but it shouldn't be about crushing people to make money. It should be about the best outcome for the government, yes, okay, but also for the citizen who finds themselves in a situation that often is not of their own making.
But I guess the big point is that the government did promise an end to Robodebt and all of these systems that seem to resemble Robodebt. They said that it was a very cruel system and one of the worst examples of public administration in Australia. It wasn't just the government that said that. That's what former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull also said about the system. But it seems like, well, Robodebt, the name itself might have gone, but the logic behind it has never really gone anywhere at all. And even now the Australian Tax Office still uses, well, they're using private debt collectors like Recoveries Corps to chase people for money. It's the same type of private firm that was supposed to be phased out after the Robodebt Royal Commission. And while the Labor government insists that it has learned from the lessons of the past, the Commonwealth Ombudsman recently found that over 1,000 welfare payments were unlawfully cancelled because of an automated systems error within Centrelink. And sure, it's not quite the levels of Robodebt, but it's the same type of system that's working in the background. There's still that lack of human oversight, which was the biggest problem within Robodebt. And the Australian Greens and crossbenchers, they've put forward a series of bills and proposals to stop all of this through a 6-year limit on debt recovery, because some of these debts have been chased up they're from over 7 or 8 years ago and stuff like that. And they've also proposed legislation that will protect or offer protections against unlawful suspensions. But the other factor is, David, that this all costs a lot of money to retrieve this money. And sure, go for the big corporations that owe lots of money, but chasing someone for a $200 overpayment or something that was incorrectly claim, they should just say, look, keep the money. It was an honest mistake. Go and buy your family an extra meal for the week or whatever
We'll take it off your next bill.
Yeah,
or
that's
we'll
right.
add it to your next bill.
Yeah, and I realise that governments are never going to have such a forgiving system that says, look, just keep that overpayment. Let's keep it between ourselves. Go and have an extra lunch or whatever. And, unless they start going down that path of universal basic income or something that would be a lot more human. But these sorts of systems, they're just a waste of time and money. Robodebt was chasing $800 million or whatever it was, but ultimately cost the government $2.4 billion. And that doesn't include the administration of all of this. So there's that issue. But the systems overall, they just don't treat people with any dignity at all, and they don't recover the money that they're supposed to.
And as you rightly pointed out, News Corp's paid nothing. Why aren't they chasing? It's easy to chase some poor guy, lost his job, or a single mother. It's hard
got overpaid
to chase.
$200 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Where's the money?
Yeah. Whereas chasing News Corp, chasing Santos, chasing Google might actually require some work and some difficulty. If they were doing that, and of course, why aren't they chasing big corporations? Is it because they've got a hand in it? I might look it up at some point. But this is, again, private firms all might hate each other, but in the end, they will protect each other. Yeah, it's just wrong.
Oh, there's also, the Albanese government has quietly passed this amendment to social security laws that give the minister the power to cut off Centrelink payments to people accused of serious crimes. Now, this is just for being accused of serious crimes, not for a conviction. It's just if you've been accused. And this is some weird kind of minority report politics where governments are starting to punish people for what they might have done, not for what they have done. And this is, we talked about this last week, David, where it's a repeat of what the government has tried out with the environment, where they want to give special powers out to the environment minister, and now they want to give special powers to the Minister for Social Services, who in this case is Tanya Plibersek. And this process will be a case where the minister can bypass due process. They can override that basic principle of the justice system, which is, last time I looked, it's still that idea of innocent until proven guilty. And we know what's going to happen here. It's going to be the poorest and the most marginalised people that will be affected by these sorts of processes. And we pointed this out in the first segment. Labor is meant to be the party of fairness, of equity and compassion for people. And we've been criticised for pointing all of this out in the past, and we'll be criticised again for it this week as well. But this is the sort of behaviour that is more like the Morrison government or the Abbott government, with the more extreme nasty bits that have just been taken away. But whenever the Liberal Party returns to government, and that might be 100 years away or so, but whatever the case is, the Liberal Party will return to government at some point. And when they get in, because the pathway is being cleared by the Labor government at this stage, well, they'll just make these laws even more extreme.
Yeah, you don't give or take away privileges from ministers based on who's in the role at the moment. You guard against future, and that's true. You don't bring in laws. If things are running well and you're changing the law, it's not because of what's happening now. It's because what might happen in the future. You could just imagine the level of dog whistling that could go on, and then it's leaked that someone with a Middle Eastern name or an Asian name has had their benefits cut because they've been arrested for an armed robbery, say. 6 weeks past, the investigation happens, turns out they're innocent. Does the minister then say, oh, sorry, pay them back with the benefits they've missed? Or do they lose those benefits for those 6 weeks? Yeah, it's got the word, this is a good dog whistle, or the words, this is a good dog whistle written all over it. Of course it's fair. We wouldn't target a Middle Eastern person with a funny name. To our ears anyway. They just happened to be arrested, and we just picked that one at random to show the public in the newspaper, in the right-wing newspapers and television, that the system's working. And then they get off because they're genuinely interested. It's a dangerous, a slippery slope, and I don't like how it's going, let alone if you're a journalist, say, or critical of the government. Look at, was it Damien Storer, the guy who was on Q&A and asked a question about the GST and how it was not fair of him on a low income? Look at how they demonised him. To then say, oh, look, this Dolbludger's had his welfare cut. So that the non-thinking can say, oh, good, that's justice. He's had We're not paying him $800 a week now. Meanwhile, News Corp, Santos, Google, etc., are shoveling tax money away into their own investment portfolios.
Australia's first treaty with First Nations people has passed the Victorian Parliament in an historic step forward for mob who've spent decades advocating for progress.
It's the very first treaty legislation to pass in any jurisdiction in the country and marks the beginning of what some leaders are calling the treaty era. The primary focus of this legislation will be the creation of Goanwal as a permanent representative body for traditional owners and First Peoples in Victoria.
And I really hope that other states and the federal government step up in this space in truth-telling and in treaty making into the future.
Victoria has just become the first state or territory in Australia to pass a formal treaty with its Indigenous traditional owners, and it's being hailed as a landmark moment for reconciliation and for Australia's national identity. And this started in 2017 in Victoria, so it does take a long time, and this is under a government that's favourable to this agenda as well. And after years of advocacy and debate, the treaty bill was passed by the upper house in Victoria, and it's that continuing process of 60,000 years of culture and knowledge that's finding more places within law and politics in Australia. And this treaty will deliver a permanent First Peoples Assembly. It will also deliver a truth-telling commission and an accountability body to ensure real progress on closing the gap. Here's the former Victoria Treaty Advancement Commissioner, Jill Gallagher.
Basically what it means in practice, Aboriginal people in Victoria will have an elected body who is elected by our people to have a say to Parliament on what impacts on us as Aboriginal people. But it's also more than that too, by the way. It's also the long-standing recognition that we as the First Peoples of this country have been fighting for since 230, 40 years.
And Victoria Premier Jacinta Allen, she said that it's creating a fairer, stronger Victoria for everyone. And this is absolutely right. This isn't just about correcting the errors of history. It's about respect and creating an equal partnership in Victoria. So it's not just a milestone for Victoria. It's a message to the rest of Australia that a treaty isn't about division. It's about dignity, and it's long overdue.
Yeah. We learned a lot of stuff from the referendum a few years back. Not all of it was pleasant or nice or stuff we wanted to hear. I think this is a great thing that the Victorian government has done. As you said, it gives no veto power. It's just a consultative body. So that won't be enough for the cookers, of course, and it won't be enough for those who think that Indigenous people get enough. And sure, if we look at the statistics, they get plenty. Lower life expectancy, higher chance of unemployment, less options to education, more chance of going to jail. Look at all these wonderful benefits that Indigenous people in the country get. A treaty acknowledges that wrongs have been done. Not necessarily, by the way, by the current generation, but in the past, wrongs have been done. And an acknowledgement of that is a small step on the way to reconciling the history we have with itself. Yes, we did some amazing things and great things and stuff that we'd never be able to do if we weren't in this country, sure. But we did that at the cost, even indirectly, of an important part of the population, a lot of whom didn't want any of it to happen. I should hope that the Labor government of South Australia will follow suit, that the Labor government in New South Wales should follow suit. I think Western Australia, Queensland, of course, it's not going to happen under Chris Fully. Tasmania's a little bit much chaotic for anything like this to happen in the short term. It's got to settle itself down a bit. And there's a more complex history with Tasmanian Indigenous people too. There's a whole lot that needs to be addressed there. But if the states do it and people find that, like gay marriage, the sky didn't fall in, that it didn't affect anybody else's marriage.
Maybe that seems to be the key, that it's got to be a long-term Labor government And, well, it's got to be a Labor government. It's got to be a long-term government, because this is the first real part of the first real enactment of the main parts of the Uluru Statement that was released in 2017, and that's the Voice, Treaty and Truth-Telling. And it's taken a long-term government to do this in Victoria, and they've been in office since 2017. And seems like that's the only way that's going to happen in the other states and territories and federally, a long-term Labor government. And we've seen Liberal Party opposition supporting the idea to begin with, and that's what happened in Queensland and South Australia, and then it gradually drops off, or once they get into government, such as the Cruelty government in Queensland, they become very hostile to the idea. And already in Victoria, the Liberal Party has said that they will repeal the treaty within 100 days if it wins the 2026 election. And of course, the Liberal Party will never miss an opportunity to show how absolutely ugly and petty they are. And at the federal level, it seems to be the same. Bridget McKenzie from the National Party had this to say about it during the week.
I think it's appalling legislation. Victoria en masse voted against the Voice, against treating Australians differently based on their skin colour, and that principled position should still hold. This treaty in Victoria is giving certain rights and privileges to one group of Australians over another. So for me, it's an incredibly disappointing day, and I'm very buoyed by the fact that the Liberal and National Party, heading into next year's state election, have vowed to repeal this legislation should they win the election.
There's a reason why the coalition has only got 43 seats in Parliament at the moment, David, and that's because they behave like total arseholes at every opportunity. But as the saying goes, you never interrupt while the enemy is making all the mistakes, so we won't interrupt them at all. But they're the ones that are missing out on all of this. And the other issue is you can't undo a treaty unless both parties agree to it anyway. But it might end up reaching the point where after the treaty has been in place for a certain period of time, a couple of years in Victoria, the electorate will probably realise, well, look, it doesn't really affect anyone adversely, and there's not going to be probably that much political point to repealing it anyway.
Now it's signed, I haven't seen hordes going through and taking back their land, and all the stuff that the fearmongers said that would happen with the federal voice to Parliament, and the right wing that gets massively amplified, particularly in the Victorian press. We're saying all kinds of the treaty will mean this and that none of it will happen. It just means that a segment of the community that has been appallingly treated, that has a built-in disadvantage thanks to policies by people who shouldn't have been making those policies, things get a little bit easier for them. And hopefully over the long term, things get a lot easier for them, and that we can have the type of society that the right think exists, that when you are born, you have the same opportunity as everyone else, and it's up to you how you do it. Now, it's not like that at all. It's a really lovely ideal. It shouldn't matter where you're born, who your parents are, how much you're worth, what area you live in, what background you are. None of that should make any difference. But it's not the truth. There's a whole range of factors that make things harder for you. And a treaty is one small, highly symbolic and important step towards starting to level that playing field.
And it's probably a lesson to the Albanese government for how they could have done the voice process at the federal level. Now, that's all water under the bridge, of course, and it's probably not going to be revisited for a long, long time. But in hindsight, well, the federal voice maybe it was attempted too quickly, 18 months or whatever it was. And it's hard to win people over in that short period of time, especially if it's got to go through a referendum. Well, actually, the voice didn't need to go to a referendum, but that's the process that the Albanese government set up in 2023. And we have to understand or accept that this process in Victoria took almost a decade. But once it's in place, people see how it operates. It won't be such a big deal. And it's also going to include a truth-telling process within the school curricula, which should be quite interesting. And there's always that chance that it will kickstart the culture wars again. And another issue is that it will start to use more traditional place names. That's already happening in quite a few places around Australia. And it's not such a big deal for many people. And I think the other states and territories will follow the pathway that's been created by Victoria at some point in the future. And it won't be Conservative governments. They could surprise us and introduce a lot of these things. I don't think it will be Conservative governments that follow through with it. Maybe in New South Wales, if the Liberals get back into office at some point in the future, they're more of a moderate Liberal Party in New South Wales. But it's probably going to be an example to all the other states and territories and possibly the federal government as well. And if it eventually gets to that point, I think this is certainly one big step in that pathway towards true reconciliation. And always, it's got to be that thing that's standing in the way is conservative politics and the politics of fear. But even for them, I've got a feeling that it will reach a point where there's just no political advantage in opposing this, just for the sake of stoking up some fear and loathing that we normally see with this issue. I think it will reach a point, maybe not immediately, but in about 4 or 5 years, it will reach a point where there's just no more political advantage in stoking up this fear and loathing.
Yeah, we'll see that Melbourne doesn't disappear into a hole in the ground because it was too woke. We'll see that most Victorians will continue at their standard of living and depending on the government, improve it or not. But it's not going to be an Indigenous treaty that ruins things for them. A friend of mine pointed out that what they should have done in the referendum was once Peter Dutton voiced his opinion, they should have said, no, we need this to be bipartisan. It would have made Dutton look racist, which admittedly wasn't hard to do, even though we were assured that he wasn't racist. It would have kept Labor with the moral high ground, and it might have made the Liberal Party rethink, oh, actually, we're looking bad here. Maybe we should think about this a bit more. Jacinta Allen putting through a treaty, which I understand the Indigenous community are happy with, or most of the Indigenous community are happy with. I'm sure there are dissenters and people who would have preferred slightly different things. That's an achievement in itself, being able to navigate a very fraught and a very emotional and a very upsetting issue for some people, and to achieve it. And while I will be continually critical of all governments, when they do good things, they should be acknowledged, if only to encourage them to do more good things. But we've also got to be fair. This is probably even more tangible than the apology, which was a big thing. And I don't want to say, oh, the apology was nothing. It was a massive symbolic step. This is a little bit more than symbolic, although it's mostly symbolic, I think. And I hope it's not
maybe because it's based in Victoria rather than the apology was a national event, whereas this is based in Victoria.
The apology was national, yeah, for sure. But I hope it's not the end of a reconciliation process, but in fact the start, that we've got a treaty that we can negotiate from, like the end of World War II, the treaties that led to Yalta leading to Lend-Lease and the expansion of democracy and rebuilding Europe and rebuilding Australia and immigration and all those great things that happened at the end of World War II. Signing off the surrender, working out the treaties, was the first step of a 30-year process to make things better. And I'm hoping that, one, it's not 30 years, but two, that it is the first step to make things better.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
The working people of New York have been told by the wealthy and the well-connected that power does not belong in their hands. Fingers bruised from lifting boxes on the warehouse floor, palms calloused from delivery bike handlebars, knuckles scarred with kitchen burns. These are not hands that have been allowed to hold power. And yet, over the last 12 months, you have dared to reach for something greater. Tonight, against all odds, we have grasped it. The future is in our hands. My friends, we have toppled a political dynasty.
Zohran Mamdani has just been elected as New York City's first Muslim, first African-born and youngest mayor in more than a century. And this was a total shock to the establishment, of course. And here we have a 34-year-old Democratic socialist defeating Andrew Cuomo, the former Democrat governor, despite all the money, the lack of endorsements, all the racist attacks and the bile and the hatred that was thrown at Mamdani during the campaign. Now, people might be thinking, this is the election of a mayor in New York City. What's that got to do with Australia? And it actually does have a lot to do with Australia. It's got the potential to change the way the politics is run, not just in New York or in the United States, but in Australia too. And Mamdani's campaign was primarily supported by people, not corporations, and I think that's what makes this moment so important. Now, first of all, he's a socialist. He also spoke out against the genocide in Gaza. He condemned Israel's actions. He questioned the influence of Israel within US politics. And that's something that's almost unheard of in American politics. But despite all of this, he still won. And that suggests that the so-called power of the Israel lobby and the machinery of the mainstream media can be broken. He's also promised rent freezes, free childcare, free public transport, higher taxes on the wealthy to pay for all of this. And the voters rewarded this. And it was also the biggest turnout in a New York City election since 1969. And I think this is the message that resonates far beyond New York. When you combine conviction with courage and politics that actually serves people, well, you can defeat fear, you can defeat privilege and the old establishment. And I think this isn't just a lesson for the United States, it's a lesson that Australia could take up as well.
It's funny. However, whenever we get a populist leader, they do their best to demonise. And if they manage to do that, I'm thinking of Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, and Corbyn was the great missed opportunity, I think, in terms of Corbyn could have stopped Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and that disastrous. Instead, they bring in Keir Starmer, a man who is less popular, according to polls, than Andrew Windsor, the Andrew formerly known as Prince. Think about that. Windsor's popularity is at 13%. Starmer's is at 12%.
And herpes might be at around 8%.
Yes. Tony Abbott is saying at least I wasn't that. In America, of course, the last time something like this happened was Barack Obama. And Barack turned out to be a good president. He had issues. He turned out to be a little bit more mainstream or establishment than I think a lot of people were hoping for. But he had to work within a system which the mayor of New York isn't quite as bound by. A lot of people have pointed out that in a post-9/11 world that he was able to defeat Islamophobia. Now, one might argue, and looking at the map, the places Cuomo won tended to be the wealthier areas. But it seemed
maybe that says it all, doesn't it?
Maybe it says it all. Yeah. There was a little bit in Queens, but it was mostly downtown Manhattan and the gentrified areas of Brooklyn. It is the big, I guess, for the idealists, is he going to really just disappoint in the ways that Obama disappointed some people in being too mainstream and not really achieving what people thought they could? Again, to achieve anything as President of the United States is difficult unless you ignore, as a certain current candidate has. Of course, he's achieved nothing good.
Oh, for sure. But I just think that the even bigger point is that the establishment, I think it was defeated in New York City. and I think that's why this is such a big lesson for us in Australia. And every bit of racist garbage that was thrown at Mamdani during this campaign, everything about being a terrorist, a communist, even though he's never actually said that. He said that he's a democratic socialist. Everything that was thrown at him by the Israel lobby, that he was anti-Jewish, he was anti-Semitic, he's a Muslim, he was born in Uganda. None of that worked. And they threw the kitchen sink at Mamdani. And we also had this ridiculous moment during the primaries for this contest, and I got a little bit obsessed with this whole process, but I remember a couple of weeks ago there were all the candidates that were asked which country would they visit first as the mayor of New York.
The first foreign visit by a mayor of New York is always considered significant. Where would you go first? Left to right, Ms. Adams.
First visit, I would visit the Holy Land.
Mr. Cuomo?
Given the hostility and the anti-Semitism that has been shown in New York, I would go to Israel.
Mr. Tilson, where would you go?
Yeah, I'd make my 4th trip to Israel, followed by my 5th trip to Ukraine, 2 of our greatest allies fighting on the front lines of the global war on terror.
My goal would be to take my first trip to Israel. My wife's life work in this area means a lot to our family.
Mr. Mamdani.
I would stay in New York City. My plans are to address New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs and focus on that.
Mr. Mamdani, can I just jump in? Would you visit Israel as mayor?
As the mayor, I'll be standing up for Jewish New Yorkers, and I'll be meeting them wherever they are across the 5 boroughs, whether that's in their synagogues and temples or at their homes or at the subway platform, because ultimately we need to focus on delivering on their concerns.
And just yes or no, do you believe in a Jewish state of Israel?
I believe Israel has the right to exist.
Not
as a Jewish state?
No,
as a state with equal rights.
And I think a lot of people would have looked at that and thought, yeah, that's right. He's the one who sounds like a leader in this contest. Why does the mayor of New York have to visit Israel? They're the mayor of New York. And I think all of the other candidates in that snippet, well, they just look foolish in that moment. And the electors would have thought, wow, someone who's pointing out the bleeding obvious. And the others were just saying what they were expected to say. And I think the same can apply in Australia. Why do so many politicians in Australia just say what they're expected to say and not start saying the bleeding obvious? Maybe they'll start thinking, maybe I don't really need to genuflect to the Israel lobby in Australia, and maybe I don't need to go on all those propaganda tours to Israel and come back and just repeat all the Hasbara journalists too. Maybe they could start thinking for themselves and think, maybe I don't need to go on those re-education tours sponsored by the Israel government, which forced me to repeat the lines from the Israel government. So I think this is the way that things could change. It could happen.
Maybe we should start reporting the truth.
That would be a very good thing to do. And I think that's the way that these things could change here. It could happen over there in New York, in America. Let's try it here. Stand up to these people and let's see if we get the same sort of political result. And it's only day 1 or day 2 or whatever it is. And as you referred to before, David, Mamdani could end up being a disappointment in the same way that Barack Obama ended up being just like every other leader in the United States after promising to be so different. And I'm not saying that it will happen in Australia, but it always has to be worth a try.
All political heroes disappoint. Some of you may have found Dan Andrews' post-political career less inspiring, for example. Some of you may have been disappointed in Penny Wong or Anthony Albanese, for example. All political heroes end up disappointing because it's the nature of politics. Decisions sometimes are made that go against what your base wants. Politicians turn out to be human beings with flaws and faults. One of the things with John Kennedy was that he died young, so he never really had the chance to disappoint people. And I know that there are people who will point to Ronald Reagan or Clem Attlee or Winston Churchill or Gough Whitlam or Bob Hawke and say that they never disappointed. Well, that's fantastic.
And that's what tends to happen with the passage of time. You forget all about their flaws.
Yeah. Enoch Powell, I think, said all political careers end in failure. And it's probably the only thing I really agreed with him with. But he was right. And it's only later with a bit of perspective that we can look back and say, actually, that person was good. That one, we thought he was good at the time or she was good at the time, but not so much. It's winning, I think. In Jay-Z's memoirs, the rapper Jay-Z, he talks about the inauguration night for Obama in 2008. And he said, it could be the worst government of all time. But at the moment, the only thing that matters is that he made it. As a black man from the hood, inverted commas, trademark and all of that, but as a poor young black guy, through dint of talent, through dint of hard work, and through a little bit of luck, he was able to become what everyone told him he couldn't be, President of the United States. And for Jay-Z, that was the only bit that mattered at that point. And I think we can say the same about Mamdani, that at the moment he could become terrible. He could become everything that he promised that he wasn't. He could disappoint in all kinds of manifest ways. I'm not saying he will, by the way. I'm just pointing out before you all start.
Well, we can savour the moment for 2 or 3 days, surely.
Yeah. The thing is, as you rightly pointed out, he crushed the machine and won. And he won over 50% of the vote too. It was a 3-way contest, really. It was Cuomo and Sliwa, who was the head of the vigilante group the guardian angels. And a little Australian side note, I saw I think it was the Daily Telegraph of all places, that he actually said he didn't want New York turning into Parramatta because he'd been to Parramatta 30 years ago and found that it was drug-ridden, crime-filled, corrupt. And I thought, that's right, I had a family reunion there. He probably stepped in on that accidentally. But the mayor of Parramatta rightly said, come on, it's not that anymore and hasn't been that for probably 40 or 50 years, actually. He got nowhere. Between the two of them, Cuomo and Sliwa, Cuomo got less than 50% of the vote. So it was a comprehensive rout by Mamdani, which is very rare in a three-way competition. Normally you're hoping for 40%, but he crushed the two of them.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.